Good morning and welcome to iteach Live. This is our time each day that at 10 o'clock we have a 30-minute sit down with a teacher or administrator to talk about the teaching profession, what's going on, their experiences, their history, and hopefully learn a little bit about teaching. This morning I have Kelli Ross join with me this morning. Good morning, Kelli.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk about teaching and your experience. I want to start just kind of maybe at the start of the story is how did you choose teaching as a profession? What got you into the teaching field?
Well, I studied history in college. That was something I'd always been a history person. I had great history teachers in high school. One in particular, I actually had him twice. I had him for world history and then again for AP government, and he was just cool. He was funny and smart and entertaining and made class fun. And so when I went to college, I bounced around with a couple of majors and couldn't find something that I was passionate about doing. So I was like, well, I love history. Let's study that. And that was great. I got to read a lot of books and go to class and talk about dead people, and it was awesome. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I ended up taking some time off from school just to work and figure out where it was I wanted to go. I was a senior in college. I felt like I was spending a lot of my parents' money to not know what I wanted to do. So I actually, in the college town I lived in, I had an aunt that lived there as well that was a teacher at a school in the area, and she knew that they were looking for an assistant cheer coach. And I cheered in college until I got hurt and had to stop, and so she asked if that was something I was interested in. And I'd never really thought about coaching, but I needed another job, and it paid well, and I wasn't going to say no. So I got started in it, and I found that I loved it, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I tried to start figuring out how I could translate that love of coaching into a full-time career, because while coaching is great, it's also very hard to make that a full-time career.
Yeah.
And so that's when I kind of started looking into maybe teaching and coaching, because then I could work at a school and coach at the school. And so when I started thinking about that, then it occurred to me that this amazing history teacher that I had, maybe I could be that for someone else. Maybe I could be that person that makes school fun for someone else. And so that's when I kind of started thinking teaching. And then so I went back to school and I finished my history degree. And after I graduated, I started looking for how I was going to become a teacher. And I was interning in an HR department at a school district in my hometown. And they recommended that I do an alternate certification. And they worked really closely with iteach and had a lot of teachers that had gone through iteach. And so they recommended it to me. And 8 years later, here we are.
Man, that's fantastic. And it's interesting to hear the different roads individuals travel down to find teaching, but oftentimes it seems like teaching finds you rather than you finding teaching. It sounds like that's the case in your situation as well.
Very much so.
Tell me about that first year teaching. Did you have any background in teaching, or where did you jump in? What grade level? Tell me about that.
I had no background in teaching other than the 2 seasons that I had coached JV cheerleading. When I started applying for jobs, I was applying exclusively at high schools. I'd subbed the spring semester since I graduated college in December. And so I subbed the spring semester and started applying for jobs when they started opening. And I was applying exclusively at high schools. I knew that, even with iteach, I didn't even attempt to do an elementary certification. Those people are heroes, but I do not have that kind of patience. I have nieces and nephews, and I love little kids, but 30 of them in a classroom, that's terrifying to me.
Right.
So I was thinking exclusively high school, and I had a handful of interviews, but what I discovered was that a lot of high school history positions are tied to football coaches. Yeah. And while I wanted to coach and I was interested in coaching and I had experience coaching, no one's going to hire me as a football coach. And then a job opens up at a district in my hometown at a junior high, and they were looking for a history teacher and a girls athletics coach. And I'm like, okay, this is perfect. So I apply and I get a call probably 30 minutes after I apply, and it turns out that the principal at the school was my junior high PE teacher.
Wow.
So when I went in for my interview, I'm sitting there and, it's very hard. And my whole tenure at that school, I worked at that school for 5 years. And the whole time I called him Coach Daw. I can't call him Joe. That was never going to work for me because this is my teacher. Like I can't do it. And it worked out. And so I started in 8th grade U.S. history, which was an interesting challenge. And I started coaching as well. So I coached volleyball and track that first year, and I taught 8th grade history. And junior high was a whirlwind. I had no classroom experience because I hadn't student taught, and it was a challenge that first year, which is when I learned something really important. iteach has great mentors, and my mentor through iteach was awesome. And every time she was on campus, I just felt so much better, but I didn't have that person on my campus. And probably about 3/4 of the way through the school year in March, one of the other teachers on my 8th grade history team kind of realized that I was drowning, for lack of a better word. I was just so under the water. And I'd heard from other people in the teaching profession that, like, your first year, you're going to feel like you're drowning. And your second year, you're going to kind of feel like you're treading water, and then you're going to start to swim. And I thought it was a great analogy because that's exactly how I felt. I was drowning. And I had a teacher recognize that I was drowning, and she really just stepped in and took me under her wing. And I guess I didn't realize how important going into that it was to have a mentor and a friend on your campus who does teaches your subject, who knows who sees what you see and does what you do. And until that point, I didn't know how important that was. And that's definitely something I wish someone would have told me, because having her in my life changed my life. She made my life so much easier. And she also made me feel supported. She made me feel like she understood what I was going through. She understood what I was doing, and made me feel like I wasn't doing a terrible job of it, which was also something I was really afraid of. That, when I started and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing here, I was terrified that, I'm gonna ruin some kid's life. I'm gonna be a terrible teacher and they're gonna have a terrible time. And that wasn't true at all, but it definitely felt that way for a while until I kind of got my feet under me, and having that mentor really helped me get there.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that. And I'm not sure who's all watching this right now or who will watch this, but typically we have individuals thinking about becoming teachers who are watching this live stream, as well as teachers already in the classroom watching this. And so I'm curious, for those teachers that are already in the classroom watching this right now, you mentioned that having the mentor made your life easier. Can you help quantify that? How did she make it easier? And then what can teachers take away from that to help other teachers have an easier transition in the classroom?
Absolutely. So one of the things, not having student taught, not having taught before, one of the things that I was probably not very good at my first year, and that I was very worried about my first year, was actually, I knew the content. I'd been a history major in college. I've been a lifelong history lover. I was teaching 8th grade U.S. history, which in Texas is from basically colonization through the Civil War. And this time period, that's my jam. Like, I studied it in college. That was my emphasis. I wrote my thesis there. I knew the content. But what I didn't know was how to break that content down and explain it in a way that a 14-year-old who, in quite all honesty, they don't care about it, how to make them understand that this is so important and this is fun and cool and interesting. And that was something that I really struggled with up until that point where that teacher kind of took me under her wing. Was I wasn't sure that I was doing a good job breaking the information down into sizable chunks. So when I say she made my life easier, it started by just confirming that, like, yes, like, that's how much information you should be giving in a lesson. Like, this is the kind of, with an 8th grader, it's super important to keep them interested. I mean, a 14-year-old has a 12-minute attention span at maximum. They cannot focus for more than that. So she helped me understand how to break down my lesson into information and activities and time for them to talk and be 14. And that was something that I feel like made my life easier, because it was that confirmation, like, okay, I am doing an okay job. Like, this is helpful. Ooh, that probably wasn't a good thing to do. Let's do this that she suggests better. And she was able to make those suggestions to me as well. Like, hey, this is a really cool idea, but here's how you can implement it better. And then in non-classroom terms, I say she made my life easier as well, because she gave me someone to talk to. Someone who understands teaching, who, you know, my mother was a teacher, but no one else in my family was. And so it was somebody that was outside of my family that understood. None of my friends were teachers at the time. You know, it helped to have someone to talk to, someone to explain my frustration when a junior high kid brings acorns in from outside and drops them all over your classroom because they think it's funny. And, you know, junior high boys have terrible senses of humor, but they think they're hilarious. And having someone to just even talk to about what was happening in my classroom, like how I'm mentally handling the stressors of teaching, having someone who understood that, who, you know, I had excellent admin at that school. Like I said, my principal had been my teacher. Our APs were excellent. The counselors were awesome. But there's still admin, and there's still going to be things they do that frustrate you and things other teachers do that frustrate you. And having someone to even vent those frustrations to just makes things easier on you. And I think that that's so important, having those teacher friends in your school and having that mentor relationship is just so helpful to both. It was helpful to my teaching. It was helpful to my mental state. I was much better off after I found that relationship, because I felt supported, and I felt like, okay, I can do this. Like, hey, I created this and she thinks that's cool and wants to use it. And you're going to find those things, and it's going to make your life feel easier, even if it isn't actually easier.
Yeah, I mean, mentors are invaluable in that respect, to provide practical help, but also relational balance. I think you're right. Sometimes it might not actually be any easier. The work effort is still 100% there, but your mindset, your tactics, your strategies can certainly ease the strain of teaching, to be sure. And so, man, I'm really glad you had such a good mentor that first year to keep you sane.
And she's still, I mean, that was 6 years ago, and she's still one of my favorite people. I mean, we text, we're not even at the same school anymore. We haven't been for 2 years, but we still talk almost every day. And, you know, and sometimes it's about school things, and we vent our frustrations or share funny things our students did. And sometimes it's about, you know, family things, like her, you know, daughter's running around their backyard right now and how she's struggling with being a teacher and you know, home school teacher for her kids right now. And, right. You know, she's still one of my favorite people, and that's been huge to have her in my life.
Yeah, what a cool relationship. You mentioned that you're no longer at that school. Have you changed grade levels, or where are you at now?
I have. So I started teaching just north of Houston, Texas, and I taught 8th grade U.S. history. I was at that school for 5 years. Then I made a brief sojourn up to Minnesota. I was there for a year where I taught 8th grade, but up there, 8th grade is a class called Global Studies, which is kind of like human geography, but kind of basic down, like, you know, the basics of this is who lives here, this is the geography of the place, this is their culture, which was a very interesting class. And then now I'm back in Texas, back north of Houston, and I'm teaching 10th grade world history.
You said 6th grade world history?
10th grade.
10th grade. I was about to say, you went down in age.
No, 6th grade that's a little, I don't know about my patience there. High school has been a fun transition for me.
Yeah, tell me about that. You mentioned that 14-year-olds have a 12-minute, attention span. What differences have you seen in high school that have been to your benefit, or more challenges?
So there's definitely, I wouldn't say there's less hormones raging around the school in high school than there was in junior high, but they're a little different. So what I have found is that my kids' attention spans are a little bit better. They can handle a little bit more content at a time. My high school is actually on a block schedule, which makes it for an interesting challenge, because I have my students for an hour and a half. So that's sometimes a challenge to find activities, or if a lesson doesn't go your way, like then you have 80 more minutes and you're like, okay, cool. So that's been fun. And the thing that I loved the most about junior high students is that most of them still had this desire to please their teacher. They still wanted their teacher to like them and think they're funny and cool. And I love that about junior high age kids. That was huge, because I was able to have that kind of influence, that they wanted to behave and do well on their tests because they wanted you to like them. And I think I have less of that at the high school level. They're not as concerned with what I think about them. They're very concerned with what their friends think about them, but they're not so concerned what I think. So that's been a struggle. Learning that different motivations and how to motivate the kids has been different, has been a challenge. One thing I love, for a teacher, I'm in a minority. I feel like I may not actually be, but I feel like I am, in that I'm a kind of a negative person. I'm very snarky. I'm very sarcastic, and I feel like I can share a little bit more of that with the high schoolers. They can handle some snark and some sarcasm, and you know, if they say something snarky and I say something kind of snarky back, like even still within the realms of like school appropriate relationships, like they think that's really cool. They actually like that I'm a little snarky and a little sarcastic, and that I make comments like, you know, I tell my students all the time that history is petty. It is a bunch of petty people doing petty things over and over and over again. And they think that's really cool. That makes them interested in it because they see things like, you know, getting history students interested in things that happened thousands of years ago is really hard. But, you know, the best example that comes to mind is when we talked about Henry VIII and Tudor England. And I explained that, you know, he destroyed his whole country just to get a divorce and marry his mistress. And this is something that like history students, like high school history students, they're like, wait, what? So like when you're able to, like, I feel like I can share a little more of myself with the high school students because they're a little older and able to understand that. And I think that that's really been a fun part of the transition for me, is that I feel like I can be a little more myself in the classroom. I don't have to like put on my happy teacher face all the time. That, you know, I can share with them when I'm having a bad day, and they appreciate that. And they like to know when I'm having a bad day or if I'm frustrated. And, you know, if they come in and I'm like, all right, guys, I'm going to be real honest. I'm having a terrible day. This is where I'm at. Like, my temper may be a little bit short. I'm really sorry about that. Like, they appreciate that, and they understand that because they have bad days. And I have a policy where I want them to tell me, like, if you're having a terrible day, come in and tell me that, because I may, you know, if we're asking questions, I'm not going to be as hard on you because I know you're having a bad day. And high school students really, I feel like that relationship is very different than my relationship with my junior high students. And that part's really cool to me.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective on relationship building in such a way that, you know, I've been speaking with a couple elementary teachers the past several days, and their building relationship is categorically different than
Yeah.
you were expressing to me. And I think one thing that our listeners and me can take away is relationship building is not a set stone pattern. You have to gauge your audience, your disposition, yourself, have some self-reflection on who you are so that relationship can be formed.
And one thing I found, especially with high schoolers, I saw it a little bit in the junior high, but especially with high schoolers, is that they know when you are not being honest with them. They know when you're lying to them. They know when you're putting on a fake smile and a fake face. They can tell because they watch their friends do this and their parents do this all the time. And so they respect you so much more if you just are yourself, and if you're honest about having good days and bad days, and it makes you more human, and they respond really well to that. You know, I'm very honest with my students. If they ask me questions I don't know, I don't make up answers. I tell them, I don't know, but when we're done with this, we can look it up. And they like that. They like that I'm honest about not knowing everything, because I don't know everything. And they have questions that would have never occurred to me to ask that. And I feel like at the high school level, like at the junior high level, I could kind of get away with like pretending to like know a little bit more than maybe I do. But at the high school level, they really want honesty out of their teachers. They want you to be who you are. They may not like who you are, but they're going to respect you for being that person. Yeah. And that's something that like I really have enjoyed about being at the high school level.
Well, it also seems, if I understand this, I've never taught high school history before, but the actual content that you're teaching is different in a lot of subjects, in that, in my perception, correct me where I'm wrong, for English and math teachers and a lot of these, they're scaffolding learning for the future, right? And they're trying to create knowledge they can use in industry later on, or professional, or just to be a productive citizen. History is a little bit different, not to undervalue its future, you know, helpfulness, but you're looking back. And so it might be harder for you to say, this is how you're going to use this in the future. So it sounds like the way you're cultivating a care for the subject is to build a relationship first, to be on a relational level with them. And then you can share your excitement and your intrigue about the past so that they can get excited about it. Am I off there? It seems like
No, I think that's a really
important.
accurate way to look at teaching history. I think the teachers who teach 12th grade in high school, and even geography, 9th grade. So in Texas, geography is 9th grade, and I think that's a useful skill because you're always going to need to know where places are. And
Right.
the teachers who economics and government, like those are things that are going to help their kids in the future. But with world history, it's more of a story to tell, and it's more of learning about the people and how they interacted, and what lessons can we learn from how they interacted, and why did they do the things they did, what their motivations were. And a lot of times, like you said, to get kids to care about it is a struggle, because it's not like math or English. They don't see how this applies to their future. They don't see how learning about the Byzantines is going to affect them in the future, because these are people that have been dead for thousands of years.
Right.
But it's a lot of it is finding that relationship and finding how you can interact with your students so that you can help them understand how things are important. I mean, we look at the one thing that springs to mind is in world history, we teach the Code of Hammurabi, which was thousands and thousands of years ago, and yet it's the basis for the U.S. legal system. And so it's kind of helping them to make those connections between what happened 700 years ago and why that's still relevant today, and why that should matter to them today. And if they don't have a relationship with you, they're never going to care.
Yeah, because you're not teaching them specific hard-coded skills. You're giving them an appreciation for an entire worldview that is going to inform a lot of the nuanced decisions that they make in life, with whether it's political alignment or economic philosophy. You are setting a very broad sense of here's our history as a human people, and it informs us in such nuanced ways that's a lot different than knowing a formula in math or how to diagnose a sentence with prepositional phrases. It's extremely different, and it relies on your ability to cast a vision.
It does.
Yeah.
And there's also the struggle with history that it's very rarely is history a student's favorite subject. It's normally not their least favorite. It's usually kind of somewhere in the middle, but very rarely is history class the reason they get up and come to school. Whether the reason they get up and come to school is athletics or their after school activities, which for high schoolers, it's most of the time not their core content classes. But it's finding ways to make that relevant to them, and teaching them that the Peloponnesian Wars is the reason we have the Olympics today, and helping them make those connections between what happened and why it matters, and getting them to understand that it does matter, that it does have an impact on their lives, that things are the way they are because of what has happened in our past. And that's sometimes really hard with high school students because they're a little short-sighted sometimes.
Well, I can tell you, Kelly, in high school, history was not my favorite subject, but one of my favorite teachers was my history teacher. And so it was always fun to go to that guy's class, kind of like your story. He made it personable and interesting and compelling. And that intrigued me to go to class to learn about it more than the driver for my learning was the teacher over the content in a lot of ways. So that's interesting. I want to be mindful of time. We have about 5-6 minutes left. And so I want to, remind people who might be watching this currently live, drop us a question. Love to ask Kelli any questions that are on your mind. And as I'm allowing some individuals to do that, if they decide to, you mentioned something that I think you've been teaching for 7 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. You mentioned something that I think you dropped by the wayside. I want to pick it up and talk about it. You said there's sometimes a lesson goes bad and you're left with 80 minutes just to fill. Yeah. I think it's super encouraging for anyone out there to know that a tenured, experienced teacher still has those moments. And I think it's okay to have those.
Very much so. And it can be class by class. I can teach something that, I generally try to break it down because generally speaking, we operate under the theory that a kid has an attention span for however old they are. So a 15-year-old can have 15 minutes of straight focus, and then they need distraction. So I try to do a lot of movement in my classroom. We get up and we go look at these maps, and we walk around the room gallery walk style, and we copy down notes rather than sit in our desks and take them. And And sometimes it just doesn't work and you have to adjust. And sometimes it's class by class. It worked great in first period and third period gets here and we're 15 minutes in and it's gone all by the, way over there. Like it definitely happens and it happens to everybody. And I think I read somewhere, and I don't remember where I read this, but I read somewhere that the mark of a good teacher is they can be in the back of their classroom and have no idea what they're going to do. And by the time they reach the front, they have a plan. And I can't remember where I read that, but that stuck with me. And I feel like that's something that at every level, like you have to be ready to adjust. You can plan this amazing lesson. You have to be prepared to throw it out the window because it's not going to work. It's like driving and you hit a roadblock. Like you have to find a way to detour. Yeah. And sometimes for me, the detour is that, all right, we all push our desks aside, we sit on the floor in a circle and we talk about it. And we talk about it like a story. Sometimes we have to throw it away entirely and we talk about what's going on in the world that day. If we had something happen at school, I had a day this fall where a bat got into our building and it was like flying around the cafeteria before school. And first period was a wash that day because they were too distracted by the bat. And that happens and you have to be okay with that. And sometimes it's that you have to just take a minute. I try to get them into class mode. So I start every class with something that I call the first 5. And it's something I started doing with my high schoolers to try and get them into like focus mode. And I ask a ridiculous question to start the day, every day. And I mean ridiculous, like, what do you put on the bread first, the peanut butter or the jelly? Is cereal a soup? Is a hot dog a sandwich? Just absurd questions that have nothing to do with anything. And, can you buy an unused mirror? Just absolutely insane questions, but it gets them kind of in a mindset of talking to each other and talking to me. And I find that helps my kids kind of get ready to focus on school.
Yeah, Kelly, 2 things just to say that. 1, peanut butter first, and 2, hot dog's not a sandwich. But with that, I remember when I was completing, I am a certified high school math teacher, and I was teaching a lesson, and my supervisor was in the class, and I was doing a midpoint. I was teaching a midpoint equation, and I thought I had a really compelling lesson planned out. And while I'm teaching the lesson, I was getting no feedback. Like there was no student feedback that anything was being comprehended. But then at the very end of the lesson where I kind of came to the conclusion of the outcome, there's clicks, there's like aha moments and engagement. And I was like, oh, I had to just get through the blank stares just for a little bit to get to the end. And sometimes you just got to fight through that. I know I had personal experience with that, but it's a skill set to either endure those odd stares or to detour. I mean, that's a learned skill.
Oh, very much so. They make the joke of Ferris Bueller's teacher just standing there, Bueller. And sometimes you do. And sometimes you have to answer your own questions and keep going and make it sound like you're excited that you're answering your own questions. and sometimes you gotta, my students hate it, but it works. If I'm getting a bunch of blank stares, I make them get out of their desk and do jumping jacks. Just to move around and wake their body up. And that generally does 2 things. 1, it actually wakes their body up and gets their blood pumping a little bit, but it also makes them start answering things because they don't want to have to do more jumping jacks.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine your tolerance for awkward silence is probably way more than theirs.
Yes, very much so, because I have way more experience with it.
Yeah. I can sit here and wait if you want.
Yeah, I'm great at it. I have a great teacher stare. I'm really great at just I'm cool, whenever you're ready, and usually works in my favor.
Yeah. Hey, Kelly, I don't see any questions coming through right now, and I know we're up against the time, and I really enjoyed talking to you. I didn't even get into all the different challenges of working from home. I can only imagine as a teacher what complications Zoom and Google Hangouts or whatever tool you've been given has complicated the issue. And I certainly hope that even if students aren't engaged, that they're safe and they're being taken care of. Because I know you're having some difficulties getting all your students engaged, and a lot of other teachers I'm talking to have the same stories. And so
I think we're all kind of in that same boat of, I have some that I know aren't going to work, but I know they're okay. They're responding to emails, and that's as good as I can hold them accountable for right now. That, you know, as long as they're physically okay. I have a student that joined my class after this time, and that's kind of weird that I'm teaching this kid and reading his writing, but I'm never going to meet him, and that's kind of weird to me. And it's definitely been a struggle, but I know it's a struggle for them too. And I think we're all just kind of trying to struggle through it together until we can hopefully return to school in the fall.
Yeah, and I'm thankful for your compassion over those students, and I'm hopeful that the transition back to the brick and mortar is easy. I think there's going to be some collateral damage and some gaps in learning that you and other teachers are going to have to overcome. And I'll thank you in advance for the extra work this fall to bring them up to speed. And thank you so much for spending time with me this morning. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was nice I enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed being here.